this video, I'm going to be going over the practice passages that I've written up for you here that is so chock full of all the things that we've been learning so far. And as per usual, as I go through it, not only is this going to be a study aid, but you'll be rewarded in that you will have 5 embedded items, one from each of the passages, that you will be able to put in and get that easy 100. So let's go ahead and translate and point out certain items. Cornelius is our subject, and our verb is spera, from spero, sperare. First and foremost, I notice that it is a verbal action, and thus what we need is an accusative subject, both of those are accusatives, and an infinitive verb, thus to have our indirect statement, which is what we have here. So let's think about it in terms of our timeline, aka, of course, that sperat is right here, and thus that's where we are starting from. Our infinitive is daturum esse, which is a future infinitive. The action must happen after of the original introductory verb, and so that tells to me that we will be translating daturum esse, which is from do, dare, dedidatus, will, because it is going to happen after the present. So, Cornelius hopes that either the best dinner will give, or he, and since it is se and not eum, we know that he, the same guy as the subject, it reflects back onto it. You would translate it exactly the same with eum, but you would know in Latin that it refers to someone else. So, it's either Cornelius hopes that the dinner will give him, or that he will give dinner. Obviously, much more sense for it that he will give the best dinner. And so this is our accusative, direct object of the infinitive daturum esse, and that is our accusative subject. Secondly, I know that the se was the subject because of subject-verb agreement. Since it is masculine, it is he masculine as its subject. So Cornelius hopes that he himself will give the best dinner. Here I have an ablative and another ablative set off by commas, thus we have an ablative absolute, with the slave ladies bringing certain trays, larger, bigger, by a lot than shields. But first let's deal with an ablative absolute. So with the slave ladies bringing in, because that AF is actually AD, bring in towards, certain trays, larger, by a lot. This is your ablative of degree of difference. So by how much larger? By a lot. And then you have your comparative than shields. I know to translate that than because it is hanging around the comparative. If I wanted to, I could have easily replaced quam scutas with merely scutis as the ablative of comparison. That is your ablative of degree of difference. And after, I'm looking for my subject and I find it here. They, presumably the slave ladies, had been called by Cornelius into the dining room, in plus accusative, ad convivas serviendas. Now this is either gerundive. Immediately I know that it is a gerundive because of its form, and so therefore it is doing what gerundives do, which is modifying convivas. And so it is not for the purpose of serving the dinner guests, but rather for the purpose of the dinner guests about to be served. If I wanted to change it to for the purpose of serving, then ad would take as its object the gerund, serviendum, and remember there are only serviendiendo, or serviendi, serviendo, serviendum, and serviendo. And convivas would have stayed the exact same, convivas, because it would have then become the direct object of that gerund. But it doesn't say what I've written in red, it says what is typed in black. So, and after they had been called by Cornelius into the dining room for the purpose of the dinner guests about to be served, water and the best wine were poured out, have been poured out. Your present of the verb to be with a perfect passive participle makes a perfect passive verb. Imperfect plus a perfect passive participle makes a pluperfect. That's why it is had been called. Here just simply were called, have been called. Or not poured out, I'm sorry, have been poured out, or were poured out, in plus accusative into the cups of the dinner guests, a servis eistem, by the same slaves. And remember that is and id with the dem is then going to mean the same, but you don't look at the dem, you look at the eis part that tells me that it is modifying slaves, your ablative of personal agent. The dinner guests knew. Now here again we have an indirect statement in which we have a verb or mental action, but the mental action is beginning in the past. And so we look at our infinitive of the indirect statement, which, is that right there. Cornelium optimum canam dedisse, and it is a perfect infinitive. Perfect means the action is going to occur before. We're already starting off in the past. We need to express the giving as to have happened before the past, and we do that with the word had in English. The dinner guests knew, did know, have known that Cornelius had given the best dinner, or that the best dinner had given Cornelius. Obviously, it makes sense for Cornelium to be the accusative subject, and optimum canam to be the accusative object of dedisse. Your first item is optimum, O-P-T-I-M-A-M, that you'll put in the first one. Let's move on to the second sentence. And mercator. So the merchant, the mercator, and then you have another ablative absolute, in which you have an ablative noun and an ablative perfect passive participle set off by comma, and they are essentially replacing what would be a subordinate clause. So the merchant, with the price having been heard, says to dative pseudolus. We in English would make that into an actual clause. We would say, when the price was heard, after the price has been heard. But in Latin, they prefer the much more compact ablative absolute. So the merchant, with the price having been heard, says to pseudolus, quim porcum, which pig do you want to buy? This is what we call a relative, a interrogative adjective, and it's modifying porcum. But if porcum had not been there, it would have been an interrogative pronoun. Whom do you want to buy? But since it's modifying porcum, it's the adjective. Which pig do you wish to buy? Ille, that one from alealalud, is plumper, more plump, by a little bit. Another ablative degree of difference. And here's your ablative comparison. By, with, because of, from, in, on, at, than. So that one is fatter than the others. If I wanted, instead of an ablative of comparison, to use quam, it would have been quam, but then it would have been alteri. In that, with the quam, you put the case of the thing that is being compared with what it is being compared to. So, it is fatter by a little bit than the others, said, but this one, as in this pig, he's comparing two of them, was fed, has been fed, pastus est, by my hand in my fields. And so the other one looks fat, but it might have been fed on junk. Here he's saying that this pig, he can vouch for it. And we have a chiasmus, in which the A and B, and then meis again for B and A, showing obviously the contrast. Certainly, aliquid, something. If it had been aliquis, it would be someone, masculine, feminine, but aliquid is going to be something neuter. And then all the way down, it's the same cuius with an ali in front of it, so alicuius, alicui, aliquem would be, of course, the accusative, but these are the nominative forms. So, certainly, something, and here we have a future participle, future passive participle, paired with the form of the verb to be, making a periphrastic. The future passive periphrastic shows obligation. The obligation, as told to me by erit, is going to be in the future. So certainly, something will have to be bought by you. Normally datives are translated to or for, but with especially a future passive periphrastic dative of agent. And so we translate it by whom, or should say by you. Something will have to be bought by you. Now again, cui, just like quem, is an interrogative, see the question there, and it is modifying mercatori. To, dative case, which merchant? If the mercati is not there, mercatori, it is the interrogative pronoun. To whom will you go? The future of eo ire. But the mercatori is there. So, to which merchant will you go unless to me? And then we have, again, a word that is with a gerund or gerundive, and thus it is showing a purpose, as it were. Now, emendi does have the form, one of those four, that a gerund could have, but we look to see if it is modifying. And is it modifying? It certainly is. And so therefore, it says, for the sake of meat about to be bought. If you wanted to say, for the sake of buying, it would be amendi as well. But here, it would be the object of causa, and then meat would be carnem, the accusative direct object of the gerund. And so therefore, in the black, for the sake of the meat about to be bought, in the red, for the sake of buying meat. And so they would have, obviously, the same meaning, but the expression would be slightly different. Quis, who sells meliorim, better meat, quam ego, than I. If I wanted, instead of quam ego, I could have just taken the ablative may. Remember that it goes ego, me, mihi, me. Both the accusative and the ablative would be may. But here, hanging around the comparative, I would know that it would be by, with, because of, from, in, on, at, than, me, or than I. Cuius taberna. So here we see cuius that is not modifying anything, and so unlike cui, which was an interrogative adjective, and unlike quim, which was an interrogative adjective, this is the interrogative pronoun. And so therefore, whose shop, or the shop of whom indeed, is sought, is looked for, magis, more intently. And so it is not able to be measured. That's why we are not going to go with plus. And so it's not frequency of being sought, but its intensity. Qualitative, not quantitative. So whose shop indeed is sought more than mine. And again, boys and girls, what you will see is that obviously the quidem is neither quidam, which would of course be certain, we have seen forms of that, nor is it id with a dim on the end of it. And so therefore, since it is neither of those, it is merely the word that is going to mean indeed. Your second item that you're going to put in is magis, M-A-G-I-S. Let's move on to number 3. Hopefully this video will be somewhat shorter. And we start off with an ablative absolute. Here we see the noun in the ablative and the perfect passive participle. So, with a pig having been bought, the slave himself. In English we would say when the pig was bought or after the pig has been bought, but here ablative absolute, with the pig having been bought, the slave himself ought, I know that it is ought because it's debeare, to be praised, a present passive infinitive, more intensely, more greatly, by so much, your ablative of degree of difference, than the butcher. Again, if you wanted to not have quam, you would merely put butcher in the ablative, and it would be by, with, because of, from, in, on, at, than, because of magis. Ought to be praised so much more, or more greatly by so much, than the butcher, because so big a price, which was being sought by the merchant, the one seeking as much as possible. Pluribum is superlative, and with a quam, it is translated as much as possible. So the first quode is opening up a causal clause, that's why we translate it because, but since this quode refers to a neuter singular, pretium, then it is the relative pronoun. So, that price, the so big price, the one which was being sought by the merchant, seeking as much as possible, had not been given. Do, dare, dedidatus. And so why are we saying that the slave himself ought to be praised more? Because he won the negotiation. So here is from pedo pedere, but it is a participle adjective telling us what kind of merchant, whereas here's the actual verb. That is the verb of the relative clause, which has as its subject quode in the nominative. Suitless indeed. Ablative absolute again, set off by commas, and your noun and your here future active participle. With the dinner guests about to arrive for the sake of the dinner about to be eaten. A dendam is a genitive gerundive. I immediately noted that it is a gerundive because it is one of the forms that is a gerundive form but not a gerund form. Remember that the gerund forms can only have the endings edendi, edendo, edendum, and edendo. Again, if it were a gerund, we would have od, and it would not be for the sake of dinner about to be eaten, but it would be for the sake of eating, edendum, because od requires an accusative form. Canam would be still accusative, but instead of what it is up here, object of the preposition od, it would be the direct object of the gerund. So again, in the black, for the purpose of the dinner about to be eaten, in the red, for the purpose of eating dinner. But nevertheless, so it says, suitless indeed, with the dinner guests about to arrive for the sake of the dinner about to be eaten, suitless, the one having been sent to the shop of a certain merchant. You look at the cuius in the genitive to figure out that it is modifying merchant and not a certain shop. You ignore the dom, you look at the cuius. So having been sent to the shop of a certain merchant, a merchant melioris, I know because it is genitive modifying it, a merchant better by a lot than any other merchant. Ullo alio mercatore. And of course, that is your ablative of comparison, because it's the thing being compared, and that is telling us by how much, so it's your ablative of degree of difference. So, Suidlus, the one having been sent to the shop of a certain merchant, better by a lot than any other merchant, that Suidlus laudandus est. Again, a future passive periphrastic, but here it's going to apply the obligation right now. Suidlus must be praised, future passive periphrastic, dative of agent, by the mistress, gratia, with a gerund or gerundive, and here it is a gerund. How do I know? Because it is a direct object, and it is not modifying anything. For the sake of receiving the best price. That's why he must be praised by the mistress. Remember that usually, if you have a agent, your agent is an ablative, a personal agent with an a or ab, but here, future passive periphrastic, dative of agent. So nevertheless, if it had been the quam construction instead of ullo alio mercatore, it would have been with your quam, and thus it would have to be in the same case. Now, you might not remember, but ulus and alias are both what we call the naughty nine, which are 9 first and second declension adjectives whose genitive form does not have what we would come to expect, and which would be us, and then e, I, e. Instead, it, like ille illa lud or hic like hoc, has ius, and so therefore it would be quam ulius alius and mercatoris. Same case as the thing you're comparing it to. So since we're comparing merchant versus any other merchant, you obviously have it in the genitive. And again, why does it look like ius? Because ulus is one of the naughty 9, and alias is also one of the naughty 9 as well. Lastly, if I were to want to change this, just not say for the sake of receiving or accepting the best price, but for the sake of the best price, it would be up to me, pretii, and then that would be still accipiandi, but it would be genitive modifying these rather than genitive object of gratia. Your third item that you're going to put in is that gratia, G-R-A-T-I-A, and let's move on in the interest of time. So moving on to number 4. Number 4, hic in triclinio. So it says, here in the dining room, this food. And so I intentionally used both the long I, hic, and the short I to show you the difference. That means here as an adverb, that means this. So in the dining room, this food, I would stop at currentibus, but I'm not going to stay for long because it is not modifying cubus, even though it does come from a verb. I find my verb, alatus erit, a future of the verb to be paired with a perfect passive participle makes a future perfect passive verb. So this food will have been brought in. AD assimilates to AL, AD assimilates to AF, but AU is actually the ob. So that would be away from, whereas that would be towards or in. So this food here in the dining room will have been brought in by the slaves. Uh-oh, I didn't want to do that. So sorry. There we are. And let's see if we can fix it. There it is. And moved up just slightly. There's where I think I had it. By the slaves, and I still think I don't have it, there it is, running hither and thither more quickly, a comparative adverb, than rabbits. And instead of quam, it would just be la poribus, and the ablative, by because of from, in, on, at, than rabbits, as it were. Vinum fortissimum. Therefore, that is our subject. I know because of subject-verb agreement. Look at the verb. And again, we have a future passive periphrastic to show obligation in the future. The strongest wine also will have to be brought in by the same slaves. Dative of agent. That's why there's no a or ob, and it's not ablative. For the sake of... Now, is it for the sake of filling the cups or for the sake of the cups about to be filled? Well, obviously, it is not for the sake of filling because that is not a gerund It is a gerundive. And so, for the sake of the cups about to be filled, if it had been for the sake of filling, this would have been complendi, the genitive object of causa, and poculorum would have been pocula as the accusative object. So in the red, for the sake of filling the cups, in the black, for the sake of the cups about to be filled. Dende, then, that same food, afferrator. This is a wannabe. Remember that in the future, Lolo, Pharaoh, and Nolo all want to be third, so that E tells me future. That same food will be carried away by the same slaves. Do you see I intentionally gave you an ablative of personal agent? That is the exact same expression as your dative agent. Dative of agent required by afferendum erit, and a normal ablative of personal agent by any other passive verb. Tandem at last, the cups completa. I will stop there because it is not only from a verb, perfect passive participle, but it modifies cups and tells me which ones. Having been filled with wine by certain other slaves, those cups, the ones having been filled, will be carried away by the slaves, and that's why they are certain other slaves. Ablative of personal agent. All the dinner guests, visi sunt. Now, this is from videre vidi visus. It is the present of the verb to be paired with the perfect passive participle, and so therefore, as a whole, it'll be a perfect passive. Future perfect passive, perfect passive. Seemed, did seem, have seemed. Videre videre in the passive means to seem. And in this case especially, all that I guess seemed to have been served well, perfect passive infinitive, and to have praised all things. Omnia is your accusative plural. Your fourth object to be put in from this passage is bene. Simple B-E-N-E. And let's see if we cannot finish it up. Thank you for watching. And thank yourself for earning that 100. So we start off with, as we would expect, an ablative absolute. Julius Caesar, as an author, loves the ablative absolute. So, with the dinner guests about to arrive, we would say, when the dinner guests will arrive, as a subordinate clause, but Latin prefers the more compact. The oleum, the oil, which could be my subject, and here effunditur means to pour out, or in the passive especially, to be poured out is to spill. And so, oil, I'm going to stop there, because fusum is a perfect passive participle, modifying oleum. Having been poured, fundo, fundere, fudifusus, into the lampstands, gratia, dandi, lucem. This is a gerund. It is not modifying anything, so it's not a gerundive, and it has a direct object accusative, for the sake of giving light. So, oil, having been poured into the lampstands, neuter plural, object accusative, that's why I say into, for the sake of giving light. Now, if it were the sake of light about to be given, it would be, of course, gratia, lucis, the genitive object, and this would be don die, because lucus is a feminine word. And so in the green, or I should say in the red, it is for the sake of the light about to be given. In the black, it is for the sake of giving light. The oil, the one having been poured, is spilled, is poured out onto the beds, in plus accusative, into or onto, by the slave ladies. Cornelius quickly sees, or Cornelius sees. Here we have a main clause, and in the middle of it we have obviously the indirect statement, which unfortunately, as I see here, there's a mistake because I have edited in a wrong way. It should not be capere, that should be an A, capere. And so, again, we make our timeline, and videat is happening right here. Capere is a present active infinitive, that A instead of an E, and so it is going to happen at the same time. Since that is the present, that was the present. Cornelius sees that the sheets quickly catch fire. Capio, capite, capi, captus means to capture. So they quickly capture fire. Sheets, which, since that is neuter plural, that's one of the neuter plurals that we have there. Sheets, which, extinguenda, Sunt. It shows obligation. And so the obligation of this future passive periphrastic is right now. Sheets which must be extinguished by Cornelius, dative of agent with the future passive periphrastic, and by the slaves, quam plus a superlative, as quickly as possible. Remember the quam plus a superlative is as quick as possible. Keeping going, see if maybe this one will work a little bit better. With these things, with which things, with these which things, if you would like, having been done, just translate it as the ablative absolute that it is, with your ablative noun and a perfect passive participle. Cornelius, the one more angry, I'm modifying Cornelius, by a little bit, ablative degree of difference, than Aurelia, and it is in the nominative, because with quam, it's in the same case as things being compared to, he shouts to these slave ladies. Is-a-id, when it is functioning as an adjective, is going to be the equivalency of hic, hac, or leila lud. If it were without that, it would be the relative, or not relative, but the regular old personal pronoun. He shouts to them. But since it's modifying slave ladies, he shouts to these slave ladies, to those slave ladies, the ones about to come, veni ventus, ad adjuvandum, for the purpose of helping. A gerund, because it is not modifying anything. He shouts, I knew. So here is when we are starting, and that's my accusative subject, and my infinitive verb is erapuros esse. This is from ero erare, and thus it is a future infinitive, indicating the action is has to happen after the knowing. Since the knowing is in the past, there could be the making mistake, there could be the making mistake, there could be the making mistake. So what is the word that can encompass all three? Would. He shouts, I knew that y'all accusative subjects would mess up, would make a mistake. I hope. And so here, sparo, we are starting in the present. And our infinitive is a present infinitive, posse, or possum, posse, potui. I hope that y'all accusative subject are able, same time as the hoping, to redo all things. He then goes on to give a command. Bring, talking to more than one, a cloak, maius. Since this is neuter, that is the neuter form modifying it, accusative neuter, and thus accusative neuter. Remember, the comparatives all have IOR except for the nominative and accusative singular neuter. So, bring a cloak, bigger by a little bit degree of difference, by, with, because of, from, in, on, at, than the fire itself. And so therefore, it is obviously an ablative of comparison. Had I used quam, it would have been quam, and then it would have to be ignim, because it would be in the same case as the cloak, the direct object, and then it would be ip. Oops, there it is. I think feminine is fire. I don't know. Feminine is masculine. Ipsum. That tells me that at least here I've made it so. Eo paleo ignis a servis lato extinguatur. That's our nominative subject. So the fire will be extinguished, extinguere, by that cloak. Again, that right there is simply it. As in is o. But when it modifies something, it is the equivalency of hikakok. So the fire will be extinguished with that cloak, this cloak, the one, lotto. The cloak having been brought by the slaves. Lotto is modifying cloak, and it tells us which one, the one having been brought by the slaves. The slave ladies, having been ordered, it is from the verb ubere usus, by that guy, referring probably to Cornelius, and the slave ladies running most quickly, very quickly, immediately, extinguunt. Extinguish the fire. And why do they extinguish the fire? For the sake of the house about to be saved? No, servandi is not modifying domum. It is the genitive object. And so for the sake of saving the house from, can mean from, the flames. If it were for the sake of the house, domum would be domus, genitive of the fourth declension, and it is one of only two feminine words of the fourth declension, thus it would be servandi. For the sake of the house about to be saved from the flames, instead of what it says in black, for the sake of saving the house from the flames. Here it is accusative of the object of the gerund. This is then genitive, the object of causa. Nevertheless, omnibus servis flammas extinguendibus. Again, an ablative absolute, in which we have ablative noun and ablative, here present active participle, set off by comma. With all the slaves extinguishing the flames, all things reficienda erunt. Again, shows obligation, that obligation in the future. Everything, all things will have to be redone. Future passive periphrastic, dative of agent, by all, or by everybody. And your last word that you need to put in for your easy free 100, thank you for watching, this was a little bit longer, but the passages were, is ignis. I-G-N-I-S. Ignis is your last word. So hopefully this has helped you prepare for the multiple choice and the vocabulary which is to come. Please note the error that capere should be capere, but everything else should have been done. Thanks for watching, and go get that free 100.